Right now, many of us are just thinking about surviving, trying to get by, living one day at a time. We are tired, worn out, and stuck. But what if God called us to more? What if God wants us to thrive in the midst of the chaos? Jesus said, "Remain in me and I will remain in you. For a branch cannot produce fruit if it is severed from the vine, and you cannot be fruitful unless you remain in me. Yes, I am the vine. You are the branches. Those who remain in me and I in them will produce much fruit." Are you tired of just surviving? Tired of going through the motions? Are you ready to grow like never before? It's time to thrive.
What would happen if I shook this bottle? This bottle of root beer, it's one of my favorite root beers, or especially my youngest son's root beer. What if I would shake this and then I took off the cap? Of course, it sprays out, makes a mess. Now my hand's going to be sticky. Many times when I've done 2 liters, it sprayed out everywhere, all over people, all over myself. Now, if I shake this water bottle, what's going to happen? I can open it up. I can drink from it. No problem. Doesn't make a mess. In life, there's times that we're going to be shaken. We're going to be thrown different things. And the question is, how do we respond? Do we respond more like this soda bottle, that soda is going to be sprayed out everywhere? Or do we respond more like the water, where you can open it up, it's nice and peaceful, there's no problem? Our theme for this year is thrive. You can see it on my shirt here. And today we're talking about how to thrive in the chaos. How to thrive when your world is turned upside down. I think many people respond more like the soda than they do water when they're shaken, when life gets tough. A lot of times when life gets tough, people respond by getting frustrated and angry, and they whine. Maybe the anxiety just really comes out, the fear comes out, and they end up being a lot like this soda when I opened up the cap. People tend to be pretty reactive when their life is thrown into chaos, and that's how they kind of respond like the soda. On the other hand, there are some people that respond more like the water. They have self-control. They're able to have peace and joy. They tend to be more proactive, and they're able to think through things instead of being reactive. There's a great little story in Matthew chapter 7, verses 24 to 27. Matthew is the first book of the New Testament, and I want to read these verses with you. Again, Matthew chapter 7, verses 24 to 27. And go ahead and turn there and read these verses with me. It says, "Anyone who listens to my teaching and follows it is wise, like a person who builds his house on solid rock. Though the rain comes in torrents and the floodwaters rise and the winds beat against the house, it won't collapse because it's been built on the bedrock. But anyone who hears my teaching and doesn't obey it is foolish, like a person who builds his house on the sand. And when the rains and floods come and the winds beat up against the house, it will collapse with a mighty crash." We see both men here have the same vision. They want to build a house. Both men listened to the divine truth. They both heard the teaching. Both men faced the storm. It's likely that it was the same storm. You can't help but wonder if these two men were neighbors. The description of the storm is precisely the same in both cases. Both men were subject to the same storm, which meant they were pretty close to one another. And everyone in life will face a storm at some point in time. But we have to decide how we're going to respond. Both of these men possess 2 different characters. One is wise and one is foolish. They both heard the same information, but the big difference is one heard but did nothing with the information they received. The book of Proverbs would say that's a foolish man, a foolish person. And one of the common traits of a foolish person is they hear the information, but they don't respond. They do what they want to do instead of the wise thing. Notice here also that both men had different foundations. The wise men built on the rock, and the foolish men built on the sand. If you want to thrive in the chaos, if you want to thrive when you're shaken, when the storm comes, then you better look at your foundation. Are you built on the rock or are you built on the sand? Many years ago, Julie and I went house hunting. And we looked at several houses, and she would come in and she would look at the kitchen and she would look at the bedrooms and she would look at the living room. But when I would go in a house, I would be looking at the cracks. And I was looking for foundation issues. And so I'd walk on the outside and I'd look at the floor and I'd look at the walls, because I knew that if it had some kind of foundation issue, it was going to cost us a lot of extra money in the future to fix it. It was going to cause us problems. In our worship center, most of our foundation is in really good shape. But if you've ever walked near our nursery and in our nursing room, you'll see that there was a big crack between these two rooms, or these two little doorways. And what we've discovered is that we have a foundation issue. It's a minor foundation issue, but when we pulled up the floor, you could kind of see cracking in the nursing room, and you could see where the foundation had moved, and we've had it checked out. And one of the things that we've discovered is most likely when they went to pour the foundation is they didn't put enough good base right in that area. And so we've got a little bit of movement in a small part of our foundation, but it has constantly caused us problems. That's why we've had some cracks against the back wall in the worship center. That's why we have had some cracks between the nursery and the nursing room. When your foundation isn't done right, you're going to have problems. You might think that why wouldn't everyone build on the rock? I mean, it makes sense, right? When we read this story, it was like, duh, why not build on the rock? Why would anyone build on sand? But Luke tells us, when he summarizes this same story in Luke 6:48, he says, the wise man dug deep. It costs to build on the rock. It's hard work. It takes time. It takes energy. It takes a lot of effort to dig down, and it's costly. Now, when you look at building on the sand, it doesn't take as much time. It's like microwaving your food or getting food from a fast food restaurant versus taking the time to prepare it, to put it in the oven, to put it on the stove. It's nice to have instant food, not having to clean up the pots and the pans. But there's something to be said about a nice home-cooked meal. And so when we look at building on the rock, a lot of people, they don't want to do that because it does take time, it does take energy, it's not as easy. Now, these two men, they built on different foundations and they experienced different results. One house stood when the storm came. Nothing happened to it. But the other house was destroyed. It collapsed. Now, if we drove to each man's house, they looked the same. You really couldn't tell much different between them. But it wasn't until the storm comes, then you find out that there was a big difference. The storm reveals your foundation. When the sun is shining, you don't care about your foundation. But when it starts raining and the wind comes and the storm comes, then all of a sudden you're going to care about your foundation. When your life is rocked, when you're shaken, then you find out what you've built on, whether it was the rock or the sand. Many of us, we'd say our life is built on the rock. And then our health fails. We get sick, we get a disease. We find out that our foundation was on the sand of health. When we lose a job, our hours get cut, and we find out our foundation was on the sand of job security. When we see a recession, a dip in the economy, we see our 401k shrink, or we have this unexpected expense, and we have to go into debt, and we find out our foundation was on the sand of financial security. Our marriage goes through a hard season, maybe even a divorce, or maybe you break up with someone that you love very much, and you realize that your foundation was on the sand of codependence or relationships. Things with your kids are not going well. They're rebelling and they're doing their own thing, and sometimes you've even seen their life shaken and you can't stand it, and it's made your life kind of be turned upside down, and you realize your foundation is on the sand of your children or on your family. COVID hits and everything changes. You're sad and you're mad and you're frustrated, you're anxious, and you realize that your foundation has been on the sand of comfort and pleasure. As I read through this story, this very simple story, I think I probably relate a lot more to the foolish man than what I first realized. Maybe I'm a lot more like the foolish man than what I'd like to admit. There's been times when the storm has hit and I've had to realize that I had built on the sand. I actually have had to learn some hard lessons over the years. Again, another storm hits my life, and I think I've built on the rock, but then I find out, actually, you know what? I built on the sand. The storm hits, and eventually, because sometimes I'm stubborn and sometimes I like to do things my own way, eventually I've learned to build on the rock, to trust Christ in all areas of my life, to be able to thrive in the midst of the chaos. The thing is, we have to be proactive. We can't build anything during a storm. If you want to thrive in the chaos, you need to choose your foundation before the storm comes. It's too late in the midst of the storm. Both men went through the storm. We'll all go through the storm. The question is, how will we react when we go through the storm? How will we react when we're shaken? Will we act just like this? Or will we be calm and still have joy and peace? This week, we're asking you to continue to fast. That's a spiritual discipline. We're asking you to fast at least one time during lunch, during the week at some point in time. And this week I'm asking you to meditate on Matthew 7:25. It says, "Though the rain comes in torrents and the floodwaters rise and the winds beat against the house, it won't collapse because it's built on the bedrock." I want you to meditate on that. I want you to think about what it looks like to build on the rock. I want you to really take some time this week and go out in nature and just sit and think and listen to God. To really take a step back from the chaos, take a step back from the storm, and just take some time to think about God. Ask Him if you have any sand in your foundation. Are there any areas that is not built on Him? This week, as I've done that, God has continued to kind of bring some things to my mind that I really need to work on. That there's parts of my life that I need to build a stronger foundation, that I like to take control, or I like to do things my way, and God says, hey, let go and build on the rock.